Some really good news about offensive lineman Charles Jagger, but some really bad news about Notre Dame defensive tackle Rylie Mills. I'm Tim Priester with Tim O'Malley and John Brice, and you're listening to Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis brought to you by RVMH Hall of Fame in Elkhart, Indiana. Wasn't expecting news about Charles Jagger being on the practice field and competing for a starting spot. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but even worse news, Rylie Mills, Notre Dame defensive tackle, who has been such a monster in the middle of the Notre Dame defensive line, will be lost for the balance of the playoffs with a right knee injury that suffered on the first snap for the defense in the second half of the victory over Indiana on Friday night. Tim, I still think that I think Notre Dame can be very competitive with Georgia. I still wouldn't rule out the possibility of Notre Dame beating Georgia even without Rylie Mills. I don't know how in the world you win a national title moving forward without a player of that magnitude.
Good point. Yeah, I think Rylie Mills might be my bridge too far. We've talked about a lot, but I was talking to Pete Sampson, Eric Hansen on the walkout. We're like, we also thought that with Benjamin Morrison. So, you thought that along the way a couple times. I didn't take Jagasa's as competing for a starting spot. I thought this is his
No,
first
I
week
agree.
practicing.
No, I agree. Pendle,
Yeah,
you didn't
I don't
mention.
think he's involved. But the loss of Mills is, I mean, it's crushing because for Georgia and the size, I'd rather lose Cross than Mills. I never thought I'd say that, but I would
I
rather have
get.
the anchor Rylie Mills in there playing with Donovan Heinisch than Howard Cross playing with a combo of Heinisch and Rubio. So I get it's tough, but it's also not Georgia 2022. So this is, it's not the same situation. They have a backup quarterback in. It's not Stetson Bennett and it's not Carson Beck. KB, thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's worst case scenario for Notre Dame. Just to be quite honest with you, I wholly agree with you. Those two had not played side by side. Those two being Rylie Mills and Howard Cross had not played side by side since basically the first half of the Florida State game, all the way back on November 9th. Then you get basically a half together with them at times 6 weeks later on December 20th inside Notre Dame Stadium, and now you move forward without it. It's incredibly, incredibly concerning to me if I'm Notre Dame against that interior line of the Georgia Bulldogs. It's very big. It's very physical. And that Georgia O line battled some injuries along the season, but they were getting back closer to full strength by the time they played Texas in the SEC championship game. And we saw them impose their will at times on the Texas Longhorns defense, which frankly is a little bit bigger than Notre Dame's defense. So just a devastating, devastating blow for Notre Dame overall and specific to the Notre Dame defense.
Right guard Rocco Spindler is listed as questionable. I guess it's good news that it is good news that Kingston Viliamuasa is at least listed as questionable for the Georgia game. If it's not Spindler, it will be Sam Pendleton. Tim, the reason I said that was that Marcus Freeman, he didn't even mention Pendleton's name, I don't think, in talking about the injuries. But anyway,
He's not
Pendleton,
injured though. I think Jagas is in return to play mode,
I,
like
I
protocol right now. Yeah.
I understand. There was also a play late in the Indiana game where Pendleton on the goal line laid in
Right.
the end zone for a little while too. So he's a little bit banged up. But I imagine if Spindler isn't ready to go in what are we talking about now? 9 days, 10 days, then it will be Pendleton. But Rylie Mills, so you put Rubio in the starting lineup and you feel pretty good about that. But just the playmaking, number one, the playmaking ability that Rylie Mills has, and number two, you don't have a Rubio to replace Rubio. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? I mean, you
Oh
don't.
yeah. No, I definitely do.
Armel Mukam has not been playing. You mentioned Sevillano, but he's more of a nose tackle. I don't know that that's a
Sevillano
viable option.
immediately repped with Mills on the ground, is why I mentioned Sevillano. They got Sevillano up. They had offensive linemen blocking Sevillano on the sideline. He was getting into his rep movement. I didn't see Mukum do anything. So I assumed at that very moment, Sevillano was the guy to replace Rubio, should he have gotten hurt right away in that Indiana game too, which
Yeah,
is obviously a bad
yeah.
situation.
Well, JB, if you're talking about the size, that Sevillano would at least bring the size, but just the know-how and the knowledge to get off blocks and how to do all that, etc. We have
Yeah.
plenty of time to. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's a stature game, and I'm going to have, if not before the end of this instant analysis, I'll have it for our podcast. The sizes of Georgia's starting offensive line, the unit that they operated most of the season with when they've been healthy, And all of those guys are 6'5", 315, 6'7", 315. I'm nailing down the five in their most recent heights and weights, but Notre Dame's going to have to go with more girth in this game because Georgia is not as prolific throwing the ball all season, even before the Carson Beck injury. But they are doubly more dedicated to the run because of that. And I just think the absence of Mills really is going to exacerbate things for Notre Dame in terms of its overall size along the defensive line.
We'll get into more of the specifics in our Irish Illustrated Insider podcast coming up, but some of the things that Marcus Freeman, I loved what he said about Jeremiah Love, because Love was not only a little bit banged up with his right knee, but ill and ailing. And Marcus Freeman was asked, what did you do to get him ready for the game? And he said that was all him. He said he was smart enough to keep his shirt on, which some of the wide receivers didn't do pregame. But he said, there was nothing that was going to prevent Jeremiah Love from playing in the Indiana game, and he showed that because he ran 98 yards, not 100% healthy with his right knee, and there were some things that happened in the game along the way that which showed us that he was not 100% healthy. But once again, a spectacular performance, or at least that one run by Jeremiah Love. Marcus Freeman was asked about going home for Christmas, and he looked like the most shocked guy in the room. The team is not going home for Christmas; they're having Christmas together, and he said it's an honor to have Christmas together with his team, and he said he wouldn't want it any other way with the holidays coming up.
Was he more shocked by that or the comparison to the 1980 Sugar Bowl? Sugar Bowl?
That 1980 Sugar Bowl, I was 20. Marcus Freeman was a long shot from being bored.
I did not think that I would be asked by Marcus Freeman what happened to the 1981 Sugar Bowl when somebody adjacent to me asked the question. I was able to mention Herschel Walker beat Notre Dame. So I would say there'd be a problem if Herschel were there too with the big offensive line that JB mentioned. But there's other stuff going on this holiday season than trying to replace Rylie Mills. Jeremiah Love has to be as close to 100% as a running back can be in December. It's stupid to say he has to be 100%. Nobody on Georgia is 100%. But Jeremiah Love has to be a little bit more recovered from that knee injury. I don't think the illness is going to matter anymore.
Yeah.
This is a fast, quick, physical team. Jeremiah Love needs to be Jeremiah Love just as much as anybody else needs to be healthy going into this game because he is Notre Dame's differentiator. He's going to have to be the best player on the field.
Yeah, we saw Notre Dame have that 16 play drive the other night against IU that I noted took 15 minutes of actual real world clock as well as 9 minutes of game clock. Notre Dame probably needs two of those against Georgia.
Good point. Yeah.
Some semblance of that. Notre Dame's best bet against Georgia is going to be sustained drives for its offense so that you can maximize what you're able to get out of that depleted defensive line.
A couple of other topics that came up in Marcus Freeman's press conference. He was asked about Jordan Faison. And that, I know there's a segment of people out there that always want to, well, he's a walk-on and this and that. But look, he's a guy that, and Marcus Freeman says this every time, he's always in position and he's a great practice player. And some of that finally came to the forefront because he's been battling an ankle injury since the beginning of the season. But had a big game the other night, 7 receptions, had a big 44-yarder. And he is Notre Dame's most explosive receiver right now. Now they need a compliment to him again when you're talking about playing Georgia. But it was good to see him finally explode in the Indiana game.
That's the season high for any Notre Dame receiver in yards, targets, and catches. Jordan Faison in the playoff game. Now that's both good and bad because none of those should be season highs for
89 was the total. Yeah.
A team. But yards, catches, and targets, no one had more in any game this year. Faison streaking at the right time. He needs some help.
Yeah. Hey, and John, Marcus Freeman was also asked about Leonard Moore and Mike Mickens, and Mike Mickens, how valued Mike Mickens' opinion is when it comes to recruiting cornerbacks. Benjamin Morrison, Leonard Moore, two guys that Mickens loved. We all now know why. Marcus Freeman says he always listens to what Mickens thinks because he's a great evaluator of talent.
Yeah, we've said it for a really long time on this podcast and in other settings, instant analysis, what have you. Mickens is elite. I think he's probably the best evaluator in college football at the defensive back position, and he's got the track record to prove it. Like I've mentioned before, there's an old scouting sheet where he evaled Sauce Gardner at a Cincy camp, and he said future NFL player, future first round pick. And Mike Mickens sees things pretty preternaturally. He's incredibly gifted in that regard, and so that's a big win for Notre Dame. And yeah, these Georgia wide receivers are not the Georgia wide receivers of recent years that might have scared you a little bit, especially after they lost the kid that got kicked off early in the season for some legal issues. So they're a very solid receiving group, but they're very similar to Notre Dame's receiving group, quite frankly. But the difference is, I worry about how Notre Dame matches up against that Georgia rushing attack
Okay,
without this.
we're gonna pop from Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis, brought to you by RVMH Hall of Fame in Elkhart, Indiana. Moving over to Irish Illustrated's Irish Illustrated's Insider Podcast. Thanks for joining us.